Things are feeling quite catastrophic at the moment. And for much of the world, the oppressed classes, the global south, they have been catastrophic for a very long time. But particularly now, there is a genocide in Gaza, the war in Sudan, the displacement of 10 million people, Trump, and all the horror that he stands for, both for people in the US and for countries outside of it. And there's COP29, it's greenwashing of climate change, or so many people are facing flooding and drought. All of this can be overwhelming and upsetting, and we need to be organizing, striking, shutting things down. And fiction can seem like it does little to address this urgency. But fiction is more important than ever right now, because real deep social change comes from movements and resistance and knowledge building that has been happening and accumulating for decades. A just world isn't something that is either on or off. There is never a moment of one single final victory and then we're done. A just world is an accumulation of pieces. It's fluid and evolving, and little victories build on victories that we didn't even notice happening at the time. So for this current situation, we also need more lasting mediums than the immediacy of the news or the fragments and brevity of social media. Quick solutions and hacks just won't cut it when standing up to major powers. Novels and stories cross borders. They take readers to other countries and regions. They have the big ideas, and so they have the staying power, the endurance, the unforgettable imagery, the resilience to be part of constructing a better world. Our heads and our hearts need to understand what we are going through, and we need new symbols and narratives and words and heroes to counter those that are used by the destructive system of capitalism and empire, of racism, sexism, deliberately manufactured poverty, climate destruction. We need the inspiration that fiction provides as it manages to imagine what we sometimes cannot, and we're inundated by consumerism, misinformation, and violence and stress and exhaustion. So there is a known story, the dominant narrative of global inequality or rich and poor countries that you see in the mainstream media, in Hollywood and so on. And it's an apathetic and lazy story. It omits the ongoing looting of the global south through unfair trade agreements, the deliberate and extreme wage inequality, and the debts that are being paid over and over. It overlooks the brilliant artists and intellectuals in Africa and Latin America and Asia. It violently minimizes the initiative of the global south and dehumanizes its inhabitants. It is a story that normalizes corporate and military invasions, and in which agony of billions is standard protocol. So, I wrote The Eyes of the Earth, a magical realism novel, because I wanted to vindicate the beauty of Latin America, where I live, the real beauty of Mexico that isn't immediately noticeable when you're walking around its potholed streets, but it is there, and that's where the hope is. Hope is the unseen heroes, like my main character, La Tortuga, a refugee from Honduras. She isn't physically strong because, unlike the Eurocentric and sexist creators of James Bond and Captain America and Superman, I don't think physical strength has anything to do with being a hero. We absolutely need new heroes in society. And for me, refugees, women, activists, and so on are up there, and billionaires are not. So I use magic, the magic part of magical realism, to convey what I think is wonderful about the world and people. The refugee character in my book can create plants and trees from rubbish, and she can see in bright colors people's essence. And those essences are so very strange and varied as well. I use magical realism to help us appreciate people and nature, something that can be kind of hard to convey with facts and journalism. Yet appreciation is such a vital ingredient for struggle and movements and social change, because it is the why we're fighting and what we're fighting for, who we're fighting for. In novels and stories, we can reveal in delicate colors the patterns in how the super wealthy are elected over and over, even though they are the least able to represent the majority. We can decode power structures and extract with poetic precision the underlying wonderfulness of life. So I'd just like to read one paragraph from the novel, and it goes, "When the world was turned upside down, When the world was turned upside down, Zimbabweans, Bolivians, and Guatemalans went on cruises around the Australian coast and on safaris through the strange landscapes of northern England. Venezuelan, Lebanese, and Honduran journalists observed the presidential elections in the US and reported for the global media networks on all the abnormalities and undemocratic elements and provided the main expert analysis of the situation. When the world was turned upside down, Senegalese people went to France to teach locals how to repair their roofs and to take photos of little French children. So look, crises and suffering and deliberate billionaire-made catastrophes can turn us inward. People more prone to self-absorption in times of misery or hardship. But books, novels, and stories can take us and our imagination beyond all that, remind us of the big world that we are part of. Fiction develops imagination, which strengthens our critical thought and the nurturing of possibilities. Stories can disturb the false harmonies of violent economies, rock with soft persistence the punctuated arc of rigged elitism and celebrated plundering. And if you think that nothing has happened lately among movements because there's been no earthquake, no immediate rupture, understand that the way a new and gentle world is born will necessarily be to a different tune than wars and their destruction. Through intricate construction and imagination, fiction has the unique power to crumble certainties of the apparent infallible nature of empire and invasions, of an economic system that revolves around ridiculous and harmful levels of consumerism. It's hard work to go beyond all that, but fiction can. And we need to be in that state of mind to embrace the task of creating a better future. So, I would encourage you to read women, read refugees, read about the global South countries from people who live in and know those countries. Read Black writers, read workers and small farmers, Indigenous and colonized people. Read bold, fearless writing that stands up to the status quo and that the capitalist publishing industry overlooks. Read excluded people because they or we get it, and their perspective is vital and their insights intelligent and real. Read coherency, writers that are down to their bones what they write. And strike, speak up, organize, because that's how you go on and where you get hope.
Let me join everybody in thanking you, Michael, for facilitating, and Tamara, congratulations. Um, I look forward to reading The Eyes of the Earth. I read The Butterfly Prison, and it was really striking because a lot of the things that you said, Tamara, are there in that book, but like you really see how you can weave, but because of this medium, you can weave things that are true. There's nothing wrong with saying something true in a fictional book. It's just that you can't say fictions in a nonfiction book. Although, of course, there seems to be more and more of that going on as well in our Western journalist world. Um, the other thing that was striking about the butterfly prison, and I imagine you probably go there in the Eyes of the Earth. I look forward to seeing it. But like for people who don't know and haven't read that one, it starts with like a couple of characters, and some of them have like good outcomes, and some of them have really tragic ones, and but like it ends with a global revolution. So that's pretty cool. And like I think that's one of the best things that you can do in a fictional story is just like show people um what things could be, and like a fictional writing is like about what's possible, even if it's magic realism, even if it's some kind of fantasy genre, it's still about what's humanly possible. And that's why like revolutionary novels and speculative novels are so, I think, important. it's just so important, and like historically it's important, right? Like when you think of like well, we're talking about the genocide in Palestine that the Israel's committing, and it's like that project, literature was a major part of that project. There was a novel called Alt New Land by Herzl, I think himself, like one of the founders of Zionism, wrote a book imagining what the Zionist project would look like. And a lot of the Zionists drew their inspiration for their future genocidal state from that literature. And like, if you look at the imperialists are doing this all the time, you know, Thomas Carlyle, or like the long line of Anglo imperialists, they all seamlessly write fiction and nonfiction. It wasn't really understood as like a specialty. You know, they were, you know, sexism. They were men of letters, right? It was about communicating to an audience. It was about um, creating a community, because writing is about creating a community, and Tamara really does that really well. For me, you know, I've written a bunch of fiction, a lot of it like pretty heavy-handed political messaging. And, you know, I chose very specific things. There were very specific things that I wanted to do. So I wrote Siege Breakers in 2019. You guys, um, it was about a group of armed resistance fighters who were working with some international allies to fight a war of liberation to try to break the siege on Gaza. So, you know, and people have sent me passages that I wrote back where they were like, I can't believe you wrote this in 2019. But it's like, if you've been watching Palestine since 2002, it's like I wrote that book in 2014. It was published in 2019, and I knew there was going to be another war. I knew there was going to be, you know, and I was just like, what if the next war is the last one? Which it wasn't, because there was a war in 2018 and another one in 2021. But like, I was trying to imagine what the last one would look like. And as I've said in other fora, you know, I did not imagine it to be this genocidal. I didn't imagine it to be this horrific. And I've speculated, like, I don't think I could be the person that I am and imagine what's happening. I don't but like uh you know, there's like an element of dystopianism in all fiction. Kim Stanley Robinson, who Bill mentioned, he said that. He said anybody can write a dystopia by just reading headlines. It's much harder to imagine a better future. And so like, I think now, you know, in like, we're in like, I think one of the darkest hours of humanity. um some of the worst things that have ever happened are happening, and so it is so important to imagine and envision what could be, even stretching the limits of that. You know, I don't necessarily need to hear like what's feasible in 5 years, or what's you know, I don't mind if there's a little bit of magic in it. I don't mind if there's, you know, if it's a longer term vision. I kind of only want to read utopias at this point. Um, and it's not because of escapism either. It's, you know, escapism is also part of our dystopia, right? Escapism is like all this stuff that's manufactured in like a corporate lab to distract. And that's very different from, you know, Tamara's project, or like art, which is like supposed to connect people and attach people and have a community. The other very specific point that I was trying to do at Siege Breakers, which is really funny, and I said this on the Electronic Intifada live stream, was that I was trying to I specifically wrote it as a thriller because I read that genre. I really like thrillers. I used to. I don't anymore, really. Again, the darker the real world gets, the less interested I am in reading fictionalized violence or whatever. But like I read a lot of thrillers. I read a lot of stories with really brilliant detectives. I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, and I wanted to kind of like imagine that, but with Palestinians as the good guys, you know? So it was like this dehumanized, you know, vilified population. And I wanted to be like, no, I want you to read this. I want you to get into their mentality. I want you to feel like, you know, the heroism of what they do. I want you to see it from their perspective, the overwhelming odds that they're facing. And so it was like this project to do that, to kind of humanize not just Palestinians, but I was like, it's easy to humanize Palestinians if they're victims. It's harder to humanize Palestinians if they're fighting. So I specifically wanted to humanize the fighting Palestinians who are doing armed struggle. And I thought fiction is a much better venue for that. And and it's this funny thing where it's like not too many people read the novel, and we all have this experience as political people where it's like um, people come to us for analysis, people come to us for news, and then they're like, "Oh, you wrote a novel, that's cute," you know, like Bill said, like, "Oh, okay, I'll give it a read," you know. And then like I've heard things from people who read the novel only because they know my political work, and they're like, "Hey, you know that was surprisingly not as bad as I thought." Like it's usually kind of embarrassing to read novels by political people, you know, and this one wasn't even bad. I'm like, wow, you know, that's high praise. But like the funniest thing about it is that like I don't you don't need to read it anymore because I feel like the world events have caught up to the point where people see the Palestinian resistance and what they're doing. And so, like, nobody who would read this novel needs to read this novel anymore. But it's good. It's still good. I still think you should read it. But yeah, so that's I those are my thoughts tonight. And thanks again for inviting me.
Um, I wanted to just start mentioning kind of what other people have mentioned about this question of like novel and fiction writing, and then people being like, "Oh, that's nice. You're gonna write a novel. That's great." I really appreciate you bringing that up, uh, Justin and Bill, because I mean, this was my experience as well. I've written fiction forever. Nothing is ever published, and I sat down and wrote a novel, also dystopian, trying to reframe the world, and also it's now kind of terrifying right now seeing the direction the world has taken. Um, and then I tried to, I felt bad for a period of time actually writing it. It was a magical experience. It was incredible. But I felt bad because I felt like, oh, it's a novel, and didn't really want to mention it. So it has that stigma. But what was interesting that I wanted to kind of dig into and tie this into very briefly is this question of the book industry as well. And so I finished the novel and then I send it queries to dozens and dozens and dozens of people and send it here. The couple of people that did read it, they thought it was great. I actually went to a pitch forum workshop in New York City for a week where we like workshopped all of our novels and try to figure it out. And this was fascinating for me. And I wanted to mention this because it was this glimpse into the reality of the book industry, in which they said, well, first off, that book's way too long. Second off, oh, it probably doesn't have enough sex in it. Third off, it needs to be like this. You have to have a harsh villain. It has to follow this form, it has to follow this model. And it was a reminder again of how the publication industry does not want stories that are going to resist. It doesn't want stories that are fighting empire. It doesn't want stories like tomorrow's butterfly prison, which ends in a global revolution. That's not what they want out there, and that's why it's so important. That's why the act um, of just writing in and among itself, particularly fiction, is in among itself an act of resistance. which kind of goes back to what Bill was talking about, or what Behrouz is saying, where it doesn't necessarily have to be activism. It doesn't have to be tied. It doesn't have to be activism, but as they go hand in hand together, it can be kind of seamless, but it doesn't need to be, because really at the end of the day, it's about story, it's about empathy, it's about connection or community, like Justin was talking about, which is so much of what Tamara's work does, is kind of build this kind of empathy and beauty links to all to empire and global empire and everything else, which is just incredible. Um, so anyway, that novel I'm still trying to put out into the world. I might just end up publishing it on my own, which also carries its own stigma with it, right? Which is the reason why I haven't done it already. But there are a couple things that I wanted to mention. One of them is stepping back from fiction to also to nonfiction and writing and journalism. There's like this taboo out there because they talk about the journalism schools, and kind of mainstream journalism talks about the need to be completely objective and the need to have distance between the people who are you're focusing on, or the people who you're focusing on in your story, to make there so there's never a connection. And I have been actively trying to push back on this and saying, no, what we need is more empathetic journalism. What we need is more journalism with heart, in which you spend a long series of time with people, really understanding and getting to know them, and building these connections, and then are able to tell stories with heart. Like that's what actually fiction is, right? That's when we're carrying a story deep, and you're making people emotional, and that can be done in nonfiction. It can be done in fiction. It can be done in whatever way it needs to be able to told. But it can only be done if there's a deep connection and understanding about what's happening, the story that's being told, right? And I think that that's so important. I just want to kind of throw that out there too. Whereas nonfiction and journalism in and of itself can also be an act of resistance against mainstream imperialistic journalism. And then Tamara mentioned this that I also wanted to speak to. And this is something this has been really my big focus over the last few years, and that's kind of audio podcasts, but not podcasts that are kind of interview podcasts, but podcasts where my goal is to transport you in time. I'm going to take you to places where things happened, and I'm walking you with me in real time. So it's hugely sound immersive. You hear the walking in the ground. And the latest one was about, it was called Under the Shadow, that I just finished the season one. I'm working on season two, in which I go to places where the United States had imperialistic or interventions. It's basically about US intervention in Latin America over the last, I don't know, 200 years, looking from Monroe up until the present. And so the first season was about Central America, and I went to numerous places. One of the first couple is about where I go to Tiquisate, which is this small town, but it was founded by United Fruit in Guatemala, to understand the importance of what's left of United Fruit. So I kind of walk back in time, and then I walk up to the present to look at the legacy, but also tell the story of the history of the United States, the US coup, the intervention against our Benz, and how that was backed by United Fruit. But I do it with deeply sound immersive. And the whole idea is that same thing is I want to take you on a journey, which is the same thing that fiction does. I want to bring you into my shoes and into the shoes of the people that are there. And so that literally 45 minutes later, you're like, whoa, where am I? That's the idea. And that's what's so powerful about fiction, is you're able to do it. We're able to time travel, not just time travel, but go into other people's lives, right? Which is just so key, and it's magical. And just to bring it back to all of Tamara's work, and this new book is also magical. It is literally magical. We have magical realism happening throughout the book, which is so exciting. So anyway, it's an honor to be able to participate today, and it's such a pleasure, and just a joy to be able to celebrate this book launch for Tamara's new book. So Tamara, congratulations. Um, I kind of wanted to just say, do any of the speakers today, does anybody have anything that they would like to say briefly about anything else, and then we can open up to a few questions. But I kind of wanted to say, Do any of the speakers have anything else that they would like to kind of mention, or any points that they would like to make before we move on to questions?
Yeah, actually, I wanna spend 2 minutes picking up on your point, Michael, about like publishing culture, because I feel like in academic culture, the way that predatory journals have taken over, and their business model is like a way of controlling academic work. There are all kinds of ways, but like that is certainly one of them. And the publishing industry is also exceptionally predatory. And like at the level that we are at, um, it's like it's another one of these cases where we're not selling a product. We are the customer. They're trying to sell us getting published. And so there's this crazy predatory culture that preys on people's desire to write and get published. And it's like, it's never been easier to just put your work on the web, like, and that's all anybody can really do. And yet there's this like all these gatekeepers and all these businesses that are basically trying to suck money from people who want to be writers. And that's also like I think that is also a way of like controlling the politics and controlling the kinds of writing that people do and can imagine. And I just because you said that, I was like I wanted to just reinforce that point.
And I'm from Colorado in the United States, and I'm part of a radical political puppet group. And we're planning a tour of the southern border of the United States, and we're in the process of crafting our story. And so when I saw this, I wanted to jump in, and I just love. We have a bias towards magical realism amongst the visual artists who have practices in this group. And I just loved some of the things that you all said that just kind of reinforce the importance, especially around helping us to imagine a world that's different than what it is, because sometimes that's so hard to do with the things that we're bombarded with every day. And as artists, it feels like whether we're writers or visual artists, it's important to help us all imagine a different space and a different way of being with one another. So thank you for that encouragement, and I'm going to take that back to our group.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Any other questions or comments or praise? Alexandria, I see a hand up. This is great. Pop on in.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandria. Hold on, let me let you see me as a real human. Hi. I'm here as a friend of Tamara and also one of the staff members of Z Network, who is hoping to host the recording so lots more people can see this later on. And I wanted to share a reflection and also a question. So it really struck me how all of the presenters today kind of each mentioned in their own way what their writing or their storytelling meant for their activism or their life experience in resisting injustice. And so my question was, for those of us who are listening who are also interested in those things, what was it that kind of helped you all to settle on what story you would tell, or who would you center in the story out of everything possibly in the world that you could have chosen? If there was something that really helped you get through that process and decide it, because I think for a lot of people, what introduces them to wanting to get involved in social change is kind of meeting others through art in this way.
I'll take a crack at it. There were things that affected me that drove me to finally get off the dime and write a novel. And I do a lot of work around racial injustice, the construction of racism, things like that. a lot of lecturing, writing. And I wanted to do something that was different. I wanted to present the problem in a way that people who were not necessarily looking for a political answer would find a political answer. And so that was one thing that drove me. But the other thing was something that's not political. It's just that I keep coming up with stories. I mean, this has been true most of my life, that I look at real world situations and then extrapolate from them and think about different possibilities and what that could mean. And invariably, there's a politics that emerges, but it's driven by flights of the imagination.
I wanted to mention a point. I think it really depends to your position. So, for example, for me, because I'm born in a marginalized community, I'm Kurdish, and later I became a refugee. So that is my position, that is the looking at the world, understand the world, understand the politic and the society from a perspective of outsider that shaped my imagination, that shaped my understanding, that shaped my political perspective. So whenever I write, or the stories that I pick up, the stories that I create, always represent that perspective, because that is my position, that is my position. I'm an outsider. So that's why when I write, I think my stories, my work, I'm talking about fiction, actually represent my life experience as well, represent my story as well. But when it comes to journalism, I pick up the stories. So in journalism and academic work, I mostly write about refugees. But when it's come to write about refugees in the context of intersectionality, in the context of post-colonialism knowledge, and link refugees with other marginalized communities in the society. Write about refugees in the context of politics. And but when it comes to fiction, I think I have more freedom, and I write about the stories of complicated people, people who carry something interesting. So of course I have more freedom, but again, whatever I write actually represent my position in this world. So in other words, I cannot write about the stories of like mainstream stories. I don't feel comfortable there.
Thank you, Behrouz. Thank you. Ricardo, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I can't start the video. I'm blocked apparently. So I don't really have anything to say. I wanted to congratulate Tamara first of all, and just great to see so many wonderful people here that I've admired from a distance. In particular, Michael and Tamara are kind of trailblazers in the sense that they worked previously for for Venezuela analysis, and they lived here in Venezuela, and that's what I'm doing right now. I started reading the book, and I found it fascinating to begin with. That's why I was asking for no spoilers in the chat. And one of the things that I found amazing so far is this ability to kind of narrate this reality, which is very harsh, without it ever sounding like it's a political pamphlet. So it's a very absorbent kind of writing, and that's something that you appreciate as you're reading. The fact that the writer doesn't feel the need to proselytize as she's writing. You know, the story kind of tells itself, and the reality starts exposing itself. And it based on that, and also the discussion that all the great speakers have brought up here today, the one example that comes to mind is kind of a prototypical case is Ghassan Kanafani from Palestine, you know, the writer, journalist, and revolutionary who was assassinated in 1972, and how he also has these novels in which he does not feel the need to turn his characters into caricatures. You know, even the Palestinian refugees are complex and flawed, and they have, you know, everything from heroism to pettiness. And how he also explained the role played by literature in this term, in this kind of resistance, which is what Tamara was also explaining in the beginning. So yeah, that's pretty much what I want to say.
That's great, Ricardo. Actually, I'm just going to tag off of that and throw this out. And I think this might be our last question, and unless anyone else has anything else to ask, or if I see other hands up, or if anyone else wants to jump in. But I just wanted to ask to the speakers here today, do any of you, is that hard? Is that a challenge to kind of roll back the politics of the storytelling and focus on the story itself when you're writing, and still have that inside? But like, what is that relationship like? That's my question I have for folks out there. Anyone can answer or not.
I think, Michael, that the challenge is to not make your characters and story a caricature. And you're not writing a pamphlet and then sort of illustrating. You know what I mean? You're writing a story. And so it is a challenge of integrating it. But also, there's an additional challenge, which is that, particularly for those of us who have done a lot of nonfiction or activists, you have to remind people sometimes that you're not like writing a sequel to Engels on the origin of the family, private property, and the state. You know, that you're writing a piece of fiction, and you're going to have complicated characters who are not necessarily going to say things correctly or politically in the right direction. But that's the reality of life. And so you have to anticipate you're going to get pushback. And I got some interesting pushback from some friends, and I had to remind, look, this is a work of fiction. I mean, give me a break. You know, you want me to write something serious, I'll write something serious, but this is a work of fiction.
That's so great, Bill. That's so great. Thank you so much. Anyone else Tamara, do you want to say anything else? Anyone else want to say something to that?
Yeah, super quick. I think it was Eduardo Galeano, I could be wrong, who said that it's not necessary to invent reality because reality is so weird. It's not, you don't have to be too creative, you just have to look around. And I think that is a lot of what we're doing as writers, no matter the type of writing that we're doing, is that we are observing a really, really complex world, and real people are not stereotypes, they're not flat, they're all very, very strange. And I think that is one of the things that I love about humanity, to be honest, is we're just so weird. But I think that's what makes writing rich, and that's part of what makes a good writer, is being able to observe oneself when it comes to sort of more personal writing, but also just observing the people around us and the world around us.
So, Ricardo mentioned Ghassan Kanafani, and I just did a review of Yahya Sinwar, the late Yahya Sinwar, who was one of the leaders of Hamas, and he wrote a novel called The Thorn and the Carnation, which was like a coming of age novel about like basically like autobiographical coming of age novel from his childhood to to about 2000. So, he was in prison when he wrote the book, and when he wrote the book, he didn't think he was ever going to come out of prison, but he came out of prison and had a pretty good run as a leader of the resistance from 2011 to his death, I don't know, a month ago now. And what was one thing that's striking about that book is, he has Hamas and Fatah members of the same family, and they spend pages and pages just debating their political positions. The Fatah member of the family is like, well, I think we should have peace with the Israelis, and I think that we can't beat them militarily. And then the Hamas guy says, no, we can't have an agreement. And they just, they have scenes in prison where they're having these debates. I used to worry more about having heavy-handed politics in a story, and now I'm just like, it's fine. because first of all, like a lot of the people that I know, because of the nature of my life, spend a lot of their time talking about politics, so it would be actually untrue to the characters that I know to not have them doing that. And so I just feel like people are political too, and that I'm no longer fretting over. I actually think that like the writer's workshop thing of like keep politics out and keep this kind of like dialogue out is another one of these subtle ideological controls that people have.
That's awesome. Thank you. More politics. I think that's it. Thank you all so much. Tamara, do you have anything else that you would like to say? No, she's shaking her head. No. Then I just want to say thank you all so much for coming here today. Tamara, such huge congratulations. It's an incredible book. Follow the link. Check out the document. Check out everybody else's links. It's amazing. It's been an incredible evening. I'm so humbled. I don't want to forget to mention some of the organizations that are helped sponsor and are helping to spread the word: Green Left, ZNet, Alborada, Voices in Movement, World Beyond War. And of course, there's so many other organizations doing important work, but these folks have helped to spread the word about today's event, and they've been sponsors here. And again, thank you all so much for this lovely evening. And Tamara, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you all.